Welcome to this set review of March of the Machine. Today we'll be looking at the applications for these new cards mostly in Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy. Let's start with the new card type Battle. Battles are a new type of permanent. All of the battles from March of the Machine have the subtype Siege, suggesting there will be future battles that work differently, but for now we'll examine the sieges. All of the battles are double-faced cards, with the front face having an enters the battlefield trigger and a number of defense counters. You can attack or throw burn spells at battles you play the same way you would enemy planeswalkers. Once a battle runs out of defense counters, it transforms into its backside, which is usually a creature but not always. A few things to note are, since battles aren't enchantments or artifacts, the colors that can get rid of them are more restricted, being limited to the agnostic removal found in white and on multicolor cards like Abrupt Decay. Battles aren't transformed by destroying them outright. You have to reduce their defense counters to 0 by attacking or burning them, similar to how planeswalkers work. But even though they're similar to planeswalkers, I think it's going to be much harder to flip battles. Most of the battles enter with 4 or more defense counters, around the same amount that walkers do, but planeswalkers often reduce their initial amount of counters by using a minus ability, whereas battles don't. Also, burn spells that specify creatures or planeswalkers as their only legal targets don't work on battles, so no unholy heating them. Therefore, I think you should analyze battles from the standpoint of whether the front face alone is good enough and the transformation a nice bonus if you can get it. However, there are a few cards that can remove counters from permanents, the most prominent one being Vampire Hexmage. With all that said, most of the battles aren't that good and seem to have been designed with a power level for standard in mind. However, a few stand out. Invasion of Ikoria is probably the best one. It's XGG that searches for an X mana value or less creature from your deck or graveyard and puts it into play. This is the same effect as Finale of Devastation minus the X is 10 overrun clause. So, it's worse in a deck like Devoted Druid where the X is 10 part matters as an infinite mana sink, but it's the same everywhere else. I think the intriguing part here is that Invasion of Ikoria transforms into an 8/8 and is only 2 mana to cast, meaning you can combine it with Vampire Hexmage to make an 8/8 on turn 3, or tutor for Hexmage if you pay 4 mana. Invasion of Ixalan is a 2 mana green battle that looks at the top 5 cards and gets a permanent from them. I don't think this is good enough for the rate, but it's notable that this effect would normally be on a sorcery, so it can generate more value if you have anything that can blink permanents. I could also see it making its way into Nykthos ramp since, although it's more expensive than Oath of Nissa, it digs deeper. Invasion of Ravnica is a 5 mana colorless battle that exiles a non-land permanent as long as it's not exactly 2 colors. This is competing with Sky Sovereign and Mightstone and Weakstone, both of which I think are better than it, but it's worth keeping in mind since this is the cheapest colorless card that acts as almost unconditional removal we've seen yet. The biggest strike against it is that it's a battle and therefore can't be wished for by Karn or Bring to Light. Next, let's move on to the heavy hitters, the best cards in the set that will definitely see play, is what I would like to have said here. While there are powerful cards, they're not slam dunks and are largely contextual, being either fringe playable or needing the right shell to go in. Nevertheless, let's examine them. First, the Convoke beaters. Convoke returns in this set, letting you tap your creatures to pay for spells. Up first is Ancient Imperiosaur, a 7 mana 6/6 with Trample, Ward 2, and it enters with 2/1 counters for each Convoker that paid for it. In practice, if you build around Convokers with a go-wide aggressive strategy, it's realistic to have around 3 to 4 creatures by turns 2 or 3. Therefore, you can expect to play Ancient Imperiosaur by turn 4 and have it enter as a 12/12 or bigger. Unfortunately, by the time you can play it, your opponent should have removal that can deal with it, such as Power Word Kill and the mana to pay for its ward ability. However, dies to removal has never been a good argument against creatures, and Imperiosaur will make short work of your opponent if you untap with it, so I could see it played in an aggro deck in Pioneer. Moving on to Zephrsinger, a blue 4 mana 3/4 flyer with Vigilance that permanently gives flying to each creature that convokes it. This is much more reasonable to cast than Imperiosaur and can easily cost 1 or 0 mana. Attacking the following turn is also better since even if the opponent deals with it, your other creatures still have flying. The biggest strike against it is that aggro decks in Pioneer are mostly not blue based, and in Spirits, the one deck that is, all the creatures already have flying anyway. It's also 4 mana, which conflicts with Collected Company. If Zephrsinger makes it, it'll be because of the tempo generated from casting it for free or near free. Knight Errant of Eos is a 5 mana white 4/4 that, when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 6 cards and get 2 creatures with mana value X or less, where X is the number of Convokers that paid for it. Notably, Knight Errant is a human, which means it could have a place in Modern or Pioneer human decks. Halo Hopper is a 3 mana colorless 3/2 artifact creature. We've seen Modern Affinity decks that play loads of 0 mana creatures and Frogmite before, so this would seem an obvious inclusion there. Moving away from threats and into removal, we have Pile-On, a black 4-mana instant that says destroy target creature or planeswalker and surveil 2. Mono-black aggro decks have been picking up in Pioneer, and this could be removal they may want to play. A counter to this is that Stoke the Flames, despite its reprint here, was already legal in Pioneer and mono-red aggro decks didn't play it, although Pile-On is obviously a different effect. Lastly, for the Convoke spells, we have Meeting of Minds, a 4-mana blue instant that draws 2 cards. While it's not great to tap all your creatures for something that doesn't affect the board in your go-wide deck, never underestimate the ability to draw multiple cards so cheaply. Moving out of Convoke are numerous other cards that didn't fit neatly into a specific category. Bloodfeather Phoenix is a 2-mana red 2/2 creature with flying that can't block, and which says whenever an instant or sorcery spell you control deals damage to an opponent or battle, you may pay a single red mana to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield with haste. We've seen a similar card, Flamewake Phoenix, see play in Hollow 1 decks in the past. Bloodfeather is obviously different and would need to go in Pioneer Burn instead, but the baseline of paying a single red mana to return a 2/2 flyer with haste has been established. Chrome Host Seedshark is a 3-mana blue 2/4 flyer that says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, incubate X, where X is that spell's mana value. Incubate is a mechanic in March of the Machine found on numerous cards where you make a non-creature artifact token for which you can pay 2 mana to transform it into an artifact creature with X+1 counters on it, whatever X may be from card to card. Seedshark is reminiscent of Sai. The areas where it's better are its stats, that it has flying, that it triggers off any non-creature spell and not just artifacts, the tokens it makes can be bigger than 1/1s, and it's not legendary so you can have multiple Seedsharks out at once. On the other hand, Sai's tokens fly and you don't have to pay to transform them into creatures, and it can sacrifice artifacts to draw cards. Whether it's better than Sai remains to be seen, but it's very similar and thus worth exploring. Djeru and Hazoret is a 5-mana red and white 5/4 that has haste and vigilance as long as you have 1 or 0 cards in hand. Whatever it attacks, you look at the top 6 cards and cast a legendary creature among them for free. It's similar to Winota and Through the Breach, although there are obviously differences. The biggest obstacle to it seeing play, I think, is its requirement for you to be near empty-handed to have haste, as it's much worse if you have to pass the turn without doing anything. I'd also like to point out that you can find it off Bring to Light or Eldritch Evolution. Drana and Linvala is a 4-mana black and white 3/4 creature with flying and vigilance. Your opponents can't activate their creatures, and it has all their activated abilities. This is a strict upgrade to the original Linvala as long as you have access to black mana, so it's good if you're already interested in playing Linvala or want a second copy of the effect in CEDH stacks decks. Dusk Legion Duelist is a 2-mana white 2/2 creature with vigilance that says, whenever you put a +1 counter on it, draw a card. This ability triggers only once per turn. Dusk Legion Duelist is notable in its synergy with Luminarch Aspirant and cards like it to draw an extra card every turn, so I could see it in some Pioneer aggro decks, although it's a bit awkward that it's not a human itself and so doesn't synergize with Thalia's Lieutenant. Errant and Giada is a 3-mana white and blue 2/3 flyer with flash that says you can look at the top card and cast spells with flash or flying from the top. We've seen similar cast certain spells from the top cards like Realm Walker be playable before, so the only question is whether you have enough flyers or flash cards to make it worthwhile. It's notable that Errant and Giada is a human and, more importantly, an angel, so it could go in Pioneer's Angel deck. Etali, Primal Conqueror, is a 7-mana red legendary 7/7 creature with trample, and when it enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards from the top until they hit a non-land, and you may cast them for free. It also has a 9-mana transform ability, but don't worry about that. Etali is obviously a great threat to cheat in with things like Goryo's Vengeance, but we already have other cards which provide value more reliably, like Atraxa and Gristlebrand, so why am I talking about Etali? Well, if you can tutor a specific card to the top, say Emrakul, then you get to cast it for free. So for example, you could play Congregation at Dawn, put Etali and Emrakul on top, and then find a way to cheat in Etali and win. Now, am I saying that that exact sequence is good enough to see play? No, in fact, I think it's not good enough. The point is that it's a new angle of attack and worth testing. You could also combine it with some kind of self-mill strategy and play a card like Mystic Sanctuary or Witch's Cottage. Guardian of Ghirapur is a 3-mana white 3/3 flyer that says, when it enters the battlefield, flicker a creature or artifact you control and return it at the end step. Guardian of Ghirapur is yet another in a long line of cheap blinking creatures, most reminiscent of Flicker Wisp, and has better stats than any of them. It'll see play anywhere cards like it have before, such as aggressive creature decks with many ETB triggers, and White Stompy and Legacy that can play it faster via Ancient Tomb and City of Traders. Halo Forager is a 3-mana black and blue 3/1 flyer that says, when it enters the battlefield, you may pay X to flash back an instant or sorcery with mana value X from any graveyard without paying for it. Many players have been looking at this as a more expensive Snapcaster mage and writing it off, and I agree that if you're playing it as a Snapcaster, then it's not worth the cost. Where I think this card is great is, since you can flashback the spell from your opponent's graveyard as well, as an answer to Cascade decks. Halo Forager is fantastic as a follow-up to your opponent casting Crashing Footfalls or Living End. It gives creature toolbox decks that run cards like Eldritch Evolution or Chord of Calling a really good creature answer to the Cascade decks. Previously, there really wasn't a good tutorable creature option since you were reliant on preemptive answers like Lavinia or Drannith Magistrate that would just die to removal. Against Rhinos, you could try to answer them with something like Deputy of Detention, but it never felt good 2-for-1ing yourself to answer their tokens, and you were straight up out of luck against Living End. Halo Forager provides an actually good answer while having additional utility with your own spells. Ghalta and Mavren is a 7-mana green and white legendary creature 12/12 with trample that says whenever you attack, choose one. Either create a tapped and attacking XX green dinosaur token with trample where X is the greatest power among other attacking creatures, or create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink that are not attacking, where X is the number of other attacking creatures. The reason I bring this up is that because it's a vampire, it has an incredible synergy with Sorin Imperious Bloodlord since it can come down and put out this enormous 12/12 creature for as little as 3 mana. Omnath, Locus of All, or Momnath, is the presumably final incarnation of Omnath, but can it live up to Locus of Creation? Momnath is a 5-mana 4/4 creature that's all 5 colors, although the black portion is Phyrexian mana. It has 2 abilities. First, if you'd lose unspent mana, it becomes black instead. And second, at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top card. You may reveal it if it has 3 or more colored mana symbols in its cost. Note that's any colored mana symbols, it doesn't have to be a multicolor card. If you reveal it, add 3 mana in any combinations of its colors and put the card in your hand whether or not you revealed it. So, Momnath is doing something similar to Locus of Creation in that it draws cards and adds mana. The biggest positive here is that if left unchecked, it'll keep drawing an additional card every turn. However, you don't get the card immediately like with Locus of Creation, it doesn't add mana anywhere near as reliably, and when it does, it's probably still not as much. Momnath is probably at a power level good enough for Pioneer, but that format doesn't have as good mana without fetch lands. It's mainly competing with the other big mid-range threats in decks like Bring to Light and Fires of Invention. In Modern, it's probably just worse than Locus of Creation and likely not worth including, although I'd want to test it. Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, is a 2-mana green legendary artifact with the same effect as Hardened Scales. If a +1 counter would be put on an artifact or creature you control, add 1 more. You can also pay 2 mana and tap it at sorcery speed to add a counter or cycle it. Now, 2 mana is more than 1. It's twice as much in fact. But the Hardened Scale deck is way better when you have scales, and adding what is essentially a 5th copy seems easy enough. Phyrexian Censor is a 3-mana white 3/3 creature that says each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn, and non-Phyrexian creatures enter tapped. Phyrexian Censor joins the long line of white Rule of Law creatures like Archon of Emeria and Aethersworn Canonist. At 3/3, it has better stats than what came before it, but its lack of other good abilities like flying or having lands enter tapped may be worse enough than its ilk to keep it from seeing play. There's also the additional angle to consider that if you have enough other Phyrexian creatures, its ability becomes one-sided, similar to how Aethersworn Canonist becomes one-sided with enough artifacts, although the amount of good cards that fit that bill is limited. Next up are a number of cards I'm grouping together because of their potential in Nykthos ramp. Polukranos Reborn, Tribute to the World Tree, and Vorinclex / The Grand Evolution. These cards have multiple green pips for Nykthos, and Polukranos and Vorinclex have big mana sink activated abilities to become huge threats. The problem all 3 face is that they're worse than other cards Nykthos ramp is already playing. Polukranos is worse than Old Growth Troll, Tribute is worse than Kiora, and Vorinclex is worse than Cavalier, or Elder Gargaroth in other green value decks. What I'd expect is that if any of them wind up seeing play, it'll be in addition to Nykthos ramp stable cards, not replacing them. The deck does have around 2 flex slots anyway, so it's not unreasonable to include these. Of the 3, I think Polukranos is the most promising since Nykthos ramp's biggest problem is aggro decks. Speaking of Vorinclex, let's talk about the Praetor cycle. All 5 Phyrexian Praetors return as expensive creatures that have an activated ability that transforms them into a usually game-winning saga. The problem is that the activated abilities are expensive to use, either in the mana paid or requirements to activate them. The most similar previous card to them is Nicol the Ravager, which we've already seen fail to gain traction in older formats. So, like battles, I think you need to evaluate them based on the front half, and I don't think Elshnorn, Jin-Gitaxias, or Vorinclex make the cut. And while I don't think that Sheoldred or Urabrask are good enough on their front half either, they're the easiest to flip among the 5. Urabrask is the most promising since it's similar to Birgi in its mana-adding ritual ability. The requirement to have cast 3 spells and pay only a single red mana, especially when the spells you're casting are giving you red mana, seems easy enough. However, this is counterbalanced by the fact that Urabrask's backside is by far the worst of the cycle, not being anywhere near the game-winning power level of the others. If Urabrask does show up, its most likely home is either in mono-red Ruby Storm decks that are already playing Birgi, or in Izzet Phoenix. There's less to say about Sheoldred, but she does at least have an immediately tangible effect on the board when she enters, and her ability is the second easiest to activate, with her backside being actually game-winning by the 3rd chapter. Thalia and the Gitrog monster is a 4-mana green, white, and black 4/4 legendary creature with First Strike, Death Touch, and a number of other abilities, including you may play an additional land each turn, your opponent's creatures and non-basics enter tapped, and whenever it attacks, sacrifice a creature or land and draw a card. I've learned never to count out random value-based green creatures from seeing play in Legacy Green Sun Zenith decks, and Thalia and the Gitrog monster look like they fit right in. Their ability to play extra lands and somewhat stacks the opponent also fit right into Legacy. Lastly in this section is Wrenn and Realmbreaker, a 3-mana green planeswalker that enters with 4 loyalty and has lands you control tap for any color, +1, up to 1 target land you control becomes a 3/3 with Vigilance, Hexproof, and Haste until your next turn, and notably, this ability doesn't untap the land, so Wrenn doesn't protect itself when you play it on curve. -2, mill 3 cards and put a permanent among them into your hand, and a -7 ability that doesn't matter because you don't evaluate planeswalkers based on their ultimates. The community has been divided about Wrenn, with some thinking it's great and some thinking it sucks. I think it falls somewhere in the middle, but do lean more towards it being not good enough. One notable quality of it is that since it grants a land hexproof, you can use it to half protect the Thespian Stage Dark Depths combo. The last section is for sideboard cards, fringe playable cards, and anything else I didn't include previously. Sandstalker Moloch is a 3-mana green 4/2 creature with flash that says, when it enters the battlefield, if an opponent casts a blue or black spell this turn, look at the top 4 cards and put a permanent among them into your hand. Sandstalker Moloch is part of a cycle of enemy color hate cards, and I'm discussing it here first because I think it's sufficiently different enough from them. Its ability to be a sideboard value card that's also an acceptable threat against blue or black decks combined with flash make it a decent play. Glistening Deluge is the black card of the cycle. It's a 3-mana sorcery that gives all creatures -1, or -3 if they're green or white. Obviously, you're supposed to play this against aggressive green or white creature decks. The problem is that some of those creatures have high enough toughness to survive Deluge, such as Adeleine, although it will kill most of them. It's also debatable whether you want Deluge or simply to wait another turn and cast a sweeper that will definitely kill everything, such as Ritual of Soot or Languish. And in Legacy, Glistening Deluge is competing with Massacre and Toxic Deluge. For the other cards in the cycle, we have Change the Equation to counterspell green or red decks, Lithomantic Barrage over Rending Volley since it deals 1 more damage and also hits planeswalkers, and Surge of Salvation, which protects you and your permanents via hexproof and prevents damage from red and black sources. All 3 of these cards are great sideboard options and will see play. Atraxa's Fall is a naturalize that also kills flyers, although it's sorcery speed. It's notable for being able to kill both Blood Moon and Murktide. Corrupted Conviction is a 1-for-1 reprint of Village Rites and will therefore see play in any deck that wanted that card. Similarly, Wren's Resolve is a 1-for-1 copy of Reckless Impulse. Volcanic Spite is a strict upgrade over Fire Prophecy since it can also target planeswalkers in battles. Fire Prophecy doesn't see much play, but it sometimes shows up as a fringe card in decks like Gruul Possibility Storm to put important 1-ofs you draw back into the deck. Into the Fire is a 3-mana modal Pyroclasm with a Valakut Awakening stapled to it. It's unfortunately sorcery speed, but the ability to cycle your hand is worthwhile. Seal from Existence is Oblivion Ring with Ward 3. O-Ring has been obsoleted by the increasing power level of cards, but adding Ward 3 does make it the best version of this effect we've seen. And lastly, Seed of Hope is a 1-mana green instant that mills 2 of your cards and puts a permanent among the 2 into your hand. Also, you gain 2 life. While cheap cantripping effects like this are usually seen in blue and red and are at their best in those decks, Seed of Hope should wind up seeing play somewhere. I hope you've enjoyed this look at March of the Machine. Thank you to my supporters, and if you enjoy these videos, consider supporting the channel, and take care.